There is a silent mistake that makes intelligent, hardworking, and disciplined people abandon almost everything they start. And the worst part is that it doesn't look like a mistake. It looks like maturity. It looks like common sense. It even looks like self-care. But over time, it slowly corrodes projects, habits, relationships, and even the way you see yourself. I only realized this after looking back and noticing a strange pattern. I didn't fail at the beginning. I failed later. Not when I was unmotivated, but precisely when life shifted slightly. A small setback here, a bad week there, a break in routine, and suddenly something that had been working simply vanished. Not because of a conscious decision, not because of some dramatic act of quitting. It just disappeared. And if you think about it honestly, you've probably lived through this too. That phase when you were doing well, training, studying, creating, taking care of yourself. And then something changed. The pace slowed. You thought, I'll come back to it later. And that later never came. For a long time, I thought this was a lack of discipline, or inconsistent motivation, or laziness in disguise, but it wasn't. The problem was something much more subtle. The silent mistake is believing there is only one valid way to continue, one ideal version, one complete version, a version that depends on time, energy, and a perfect context. When that version breaks, everything breaks with it. It's as if the brain says, if I can't do it properly, then I won't do it at all. And that's where zero is born. Zero effort, zero contact, zero continuity. Not because you don't care, but because you never built a smaller version of continuation for when the ideal version becomes impossible. I saw this happen to me in many ways. Routines that only worked when everything was perfectly aligned. Creative projects that depended on long, uninterrupted blocks of time. Habits that required an energy level I didn't always have. On good days, everything flowed. On bad days, everything stopped. And the problem isn't having bad days. The problem is what you do on them. Because every time you let something drop to zero, your brain records a dangerous message. This isn't really who I am. You start to see yourself as inconsistent, as someone who starts but doesn't finish, as someone who needs to be in the right mood to act. And that identity weighs more than any productivity technique. What no one tells you is that the greatest enemy of progress isn't making mistakes, failing or resting. It's stopping completely. Zero looks harmless, but it breaks the line of continuity. It forces you to start over emotionally as well. And starting over is always harder than continuing, even if continuing is minimal. That's why so many people live in cycles of excitement and abandonment. They don't lose the habit. They lose the connection to it. They lose the feeling that this is part of who I am. The shift happens when you realize that consistency is not repeated intensity. It's continuous presence, even when it's weak, even when it's small, even when it feels a little ridiculous. On days when everything goes wrong, the goal isn't to move forward. It's not to disappear. It's to leave a minimal signal of continuity, an action so small that it doesn't require motivation, willpower, or courage. It only requires a decision, because as long as there is some movement, your identity stays alive. You are still the person who shows up, even if you only show up for 2 minutes. This changes everything, because suddenly, bad days stop being days of failure and become simply maintenance days. You don't judge yourself. You don't punish yourself. You don't spiral. You just ask, what is the smallest possible way not to abandon this today? Sometimes it's one page. Sometimes it's one message. Sometimes it's opening the file and writing one terrible sentence. Sometimes it's just showing up. And the cumulative effect of this is much bigger than it looks. Not in the short term, but in how you see yourself. You stop being someone who depends on conditions and become someone who adapts to them. The silent mistake is confusing a pause with abandonment, rest with rupture, flexibility with quitting. Disciplined people fall into this trap because they are demanding of themselves. They hold a high standard. And when they can't meet it, they would rather stop than do a bad job. But the brain doesn't interpret this as perfectionism. It interprets it as absence, and repeated absence becomes identity. The irony is that by trying to maintain a high standard, you end up destroying the consistency that actually creates results. The most important point is this: you don't need strength to continue. You need alternative versions, a full version for good days, and a minimal version for bad days. Most people only build the first one. And when it breaks, there's nothing left. Those who build both don't depend on motivation, a perfect routine, or an ideal week. They continue even when life messes everything up. And in the long run, that creates an absurd advantage. If you look at any area of your life where you feel frustrated, it's probably not because you never tried. It's because you let it drop to zero too many times. And each zero was a small silent act of quitting, Not definitive, but cumulative. The good news is that this is reversible. Not with a big restart, but with the decision to never disappear completely again. To always leave a trace, a signal, a minimal gesture that says, "This still matters." Now I want to hear from you. In which area of your life do you most often let things drop to zero when your routine breaks? Training, studying, work, relationships, self-care? Write it in the comments, because naming it is the first step to changing the pattern. If this video made sense to you, leave a like. It helps me keep bringing this kind of content. And if you're not subscribed yet, subscribe now. Not out of obligation, but as a small act of continuity. Because in the end, it's not about doing everything. It's about never disappearing.